Hello, everybody. Welcome back to HavoKast. This is essentially a YouTube channel about nothing, so I figure, hey, let's talk about the best show about nothing ever. Seinfeld is a show that ran for about 11 years, give or take, 9 seasons, and had some of the most relatable and, in my opinion, hilarious comedy on any sitcom. I thought it was a great show because there was no feeling element involved. It was just you had a good time, you laughed, you turned your brain off for a little bit, and you watched these characters suffer through a various just onslaught of horrible, cringy situations. The best thing about this show, again, I'm going to go back to it, there was no drama element to it. There was no, a lot of sitcoms kind of devolve into that territory of like, oh, now it's a love story, now it's this, now it's that. It's like, no, this was just funny the whole way through. And really respect, a show for not trying to be deeper or more meaningful than it is. It was just funny. Some people love that. Some people hate that. I totally get both sides. I know people watch shows for a various amount of reasons. If I'm watching a comedy, I just want to laugh. I don't need anything deeper. And maybe I'm more simple than a lot of y'all, but honestly, I just want to laugh when I watch a show that is supposed to be funny. So that's kind of where I'm at with this show, and we're going to do a ranking of the seasons. We're going to kind of give a light overview of the seasons, and I'll kind of explain my best jumping off point if you want to get into the show. It's every few years it switches a different streaming site. You can turn on like a lot of those, older TV channels if anybody even still has cable and find it floating around somewhere. But yeah, we'll get into it. I will start this tier list off, and we'll just kind of give a little overview of what's going on with this show. I appreciate y'all for being here, and I guess without any more long-winded explanation, we'll get into it. Starting with Season 1, it's basically a pilot season. I mean, there was a pilot show. The Seinfeld Chronicles is what it was titled, but really Season 1 is, five episodes, and it was kind of a good tipping off point for the show. It sets you up, but it's a really deep cut kind of season. All the characters are still getting fleshed out. Everybody, it's like the first season of The Office when you watch that. The pilot season's always a little weird, especially around sitcoms, because the characters are not super well defined. You don't know what you're getting yet. Everybody's still feeling it out, getting their chemistry right and everything. So the acting's a little off. The character look and feel is a little off. And, it's good, but it's good in its way if you like the show. If you like the show, you can go back and watch it and find some value in it. Definitely, a low point. Not really a fair comparison to the rest of the seasons because there was better writing, there was more thought out characters and things like that. It was definitely one of those, we're just starting to find out where we're going to be with this show. And it was literally about nothing. I mean, you really look at it, there are just situations, everyday life. So it's super relatable right off the get-go. And you get into it and you say, okay, these are some kind of wildly, like the robbery, for instance. I mean, it's almost like you're living in a fantasy, where things get stolen and you don't know what you're going to do, and you make all these wild scenarios up and things like that. Or like the stock tip, which was the final one in that season, where, okay, we see these characters, we see they're in fantastical situations, but they're kind of somewhat grounded in reality. So it's, like I say, it's a show where you can kind of just get lost in, but that is a tough season to really start up. A lot of people want to jump into new shows, and they want to jump in at the very beginning. I get it. With this sitcom, I feel like it's not 100% necessary. And again, I think that kind of comes from there's no real character arc and development for the most part. So you can just kind of pick it up and enjoy wherever you do end up picking up. But yeah, Season 1 for me, that is the one where it's definitely a low point, in my opinion, in the whole series. I guess it depends on what you view as a low point, because, it gets pretty wild and out there, as we'll get into towards the later seasons. But for me, this show it finds its balance in the middle, of course, and it's just really on this high stride that I really enjoy. If you want to get into the show, We'll come to that later on when I'm like really jumping into it. I would say jump in around season 4. We'll get to why later, but season 4 feels like the best tip-off point. If you start on episode 1, season 4, that's probably your best chance to jump in there. If you want to really hit it, season 3 kind of gives you a lot of great episodes. But yeah, I would not jump in at season 1. I think you go back and watch season 1 and 2. If you enjoy the show, just it's extra, it's good, it's a fun season. The next one I believe would be season 2 for me. I love season 2. It's a good season. I don't think it is even close to their best. The only reason I would rank it as low as it is, I think it's leaps and bounds above season 1. I mean, this is essentially when the show should be a season 1. Like I say, the first 5 episodes, the true season 1, the whole thing feels like a pilot, like, hey, let's show you what this can be about. Let's show you what can happen here. So season 2 has a lot of really funny, really interesting plots, but they're all wildly different episodes. The busboy is a weird episode where, George accidentally gets a busboy fired from his job, and then, they go to apologize at his apartment. A cat gets let out, and then they look for his cat. It's just, a whole comedy of errors that just, one after the other. But stuff like that you just can't imagine happening, but it can happen. The heart attack episode, they tackle like holistic healing and stuff, which at that time was just kind of, hitting the mainstream a little bit. So there's jokes about that kind of stuff. And, it's just, there's a lot of really interesting plot points. Each episode has something in it for everybody, I feel like, but I think the whole season, there's no real continuity, of course. Most sitcoms at the time didn't even really think about story arcs and continuity and stuff like that. It's just kind of like, just put out a show. The characters find themselves in a different situation each week, and that is what it is, which is what Seinfeld did every single week. But as you get towards the later seasons, there's joke callbacks and things like that, and it feels a little bit more like, hey, this is an actual show overall, and we can follow along week to week. The history behind this show is actually really interesting, too. They do all kinds of, documentaries and interviews and stuff on it, but they did some groundbreaking stuff. It's so funny. Like, the behind the scenes is so... If you look at the show as a whole, it's a fun show to watch, but it's so much more interesting to see what went into the show and how it became the show and everything like that. So I think almost if you're looking for just historical viewpoints and like what it did for comedy and shows in general, I mean, there was some groundbreaking stuff that they did on this one. But yeah, so season 1 at the bottom at 9, and then at 8, the next step up, I would say season 2. It's funny again, but deeper cuts, I think. I don't think you would see a whole lot of these episodes rerunning on TV. But we'll get into season 9 would be my next season in the list. So at number 7, we'll have season 9 for sure. I think with this season, they had a noticeable few departures in the actual staff. I believe Larry David was involved in the show season 8 and 9, but he wasn't, writing and producing and doing all that as much. I think he was still involved, but not as big an involvement. I think it became more of just their cash cow show at NBC. So there was a lot more production, a lot more ideas that went into it. And the episodes were just so wild and out there. So I enjoy season 9. I think it's fun. I think it's interesting. I think the situations are just wild and crazy. But as a show, it's not as grounded anymore. There are still relatable bits. There are incredibly funny parts in here. The dealership is a great one. The dealership episode, I mean, anybody who's ever tried to buy or, sell a car or anything, if you've just gone to a car dealership, I mean, it's just absolutely hilarious. And, every character around season, I would say 7, 8, and 9, like those 3 seasons towards the end, every character had very well-defined stories, and you follow them. I think something that kind of bothers me about these last couple of seasons, though, is that they cut away so frequently. It's like they had so much going on, they had to set up so much and do so much that you almost have a cutaway like every couple of minutes to another character. And it just kind of drove me crazy where it was like, all right, can we just stay somewhere real quick? Can we just enjoy this? I mean, there was definitely episodes where it wasn't like that, but man, it was so ridiculous. So many things have. The Merv Griffin show episode was hilarious. Kramer's apartment was just a wonderland of what could be in an apartment. You never know. It's a Pandora's box of like, you open that door and anything could come out. But the Merv Griffin show episode was just so crazy. He has a set, basically like a fake, late night talk show set from the Merv Griffin show in his apartment. And it's just like, wow, that is, who thinks of stuff like that? But it's funny. And there were so many episodes, and it was a season that was very, like, so many people watched it still, and it was still so great. The Frogger episode was awesome. The Maid episode was hilarious. Like, just the situations that you think are a situation on the surface develops into a whole other situation. It's hilarious. Something I also kind of find not so great about this season, though, is that it does kind of jump away from the that like continuity thing. So Seinfeld used to call back to previous episodes, or like they'd have running jokes throughout each season, or even jump from season to season with jokes. They didn't do it really anymore during this time period. It was just kind of like every show was its own self-contained thing. And I think they went more that route because they were like, okay, season 4, 5, 6, even 7, where they had like some overall themes throughout the whole series, it kind of, begs for commitment from your audience. And I think they wanted to kind of go away from that commitment aspect. So, every show was just its own little adventure, which, it works, but in my opinion, there are much better seasons after that. So season 9, I mean, there was a lot of jumping off points. It had the finale, though. Finale was pretty weak. Essentially it was just kind of their own best of episode, where they brought back a whole bunch of characters, which was a very cool thing to do, to be fair. You bring back some prominent characters and then they reappear in your show and get kind of one final send-off with everybody else. It was just a tough way to end the show. Just a controversial end with the Puerto Rican Day Parade one, which I don't know. It wasn't a good episode in my opinion anyway, but also it just has this like these weird, controversial undertones to the whole thing. I don't even think they can show it on TV anymore. But yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's weird. Anyway, season 9, kind of all over the place, very out there, very outlandish. We're going to jump into season 7 now, which is my next step up. Season 6 was great. Season 7 was great, and they were great in their own ways. I would definitely rank season 7 above 9, though, at the 6th spot, and pretty well below like season 6. So I think 8 has the slight edge on 7, so I will rank 8 at 5 also. So it's a little confusing, a little convoluted, but season 1 is my low point. Season 2 is next. Season 9, and then season 7. So season 7 is sandwiched between 8 and 9. It's more grounded in story. It's more elongated and has an overall arc with George this time. George was every one of the characters was great. And every one of them had their fans. George is hilarious. He's a fantastic actor. Jason Alexander just nails every little detail. You watch him in this show. His eye movements, his subtleties, how he inflects his voice. It's just so good. And that's something I don't think people understand is like how good the acting was from certain characters on this show. Like it really makes parts. But yeah, season 7 is at my 6th spot. It's it's in my opinion very highly above season 9. I think it does a great job. Something that detracts from the season though is that you brought in the Susan character again, and George gets engaged to her. So the plot of that whole season is he is engaged because he thought, he was going to grow up with Jerry and they were both going to just do like more serious stuff. And this is where that whole like feelings and relationship development aspect could have gone in most shows where they take a more serious route and it gets a little soppy and whatnot. But no, this was just hilarious the whole way through. George did it purely as a reaction and then regrets the decision the whole way through. So it's just really funny. And they play off so much of that, like, independent George is hilarious. If you can find any bit of just hilarious material in that, independent George is just a very funny premise where, Susan becomes friends with them. And there's so many parallels you can draw to today. I always think it's funny when they're in the coffee shop and it's usually just them four sitting in a booth. There's 4 seats and Susan has become their friend and been invited into their world. And everybody's like, oh, that's probably not the best idea, right? George doesn't realize how involved in everyday life she is now. So he meets them at the coffee shop. She's already there. There's 4 seats. And that whole exchange right there is so freaking funny. Like, it just reminds me of any time you're in a game and there's a squad and you invite one too many people, or the regulars, that didn't show up finally show up and they come in and they're like, oh, well, you already got a squad. What am I going to do? It's just, like I say, there's so much relatable material that kind of translates decades. It's hilarious. But, yeah, it just kind of goes with, like, meeting the family. I mean, the families meeting the families. Like, there's so many good things that happen throughout this. They start getting into the weird territory though. The calzone episode is where things start getting a little crazy. The bottle deposit episode, where you start seeing the signs of season 8 and 9 where things start getting a little too outlandish for, some people's taste. Like I say, the Susan character is in most of these episodes. She reappears. A lot of people did not like the lack of chemistry between George and Susan. There are bits that I'm just like, yeah, this is just, it's not great. But there are also bits where it works pretty well. And, there's just so much gold in there. So much gold. The pool guy episode, Soup Nazi, like, just classics. Some people don't get it, and I totally understand that. But if you just want to unplug and watch a season, this is a good spot for you. There's definitely better spots to start in, but, season 7, again, has that big story arc, so you kind of have to be invested. I think it's got one of the biggest story arcs besides season 4. And again, at the time, it was pretty groundbreaking for them to do that with a sitcom. Like, you're supposed to just sit at home on Thursday night or whatever, hit your must-watch TV, TV guide. You watch, one after the other of just shows you don't, need to know before or after. There's no setup. Just laugh, have a good time, whatever. Seinfeld did something a little different a couple of seasons where you actually had to watch last week and then watch next week. And it was deliberate, but also a huge risk. So, just another way that kind of paved the way for other shows, I guess, to bring those continuity issues in. But yeah, like I was saying a little bit before, season 8 will probably be next in my list. Season 8, like I say, 7 is sandwiched between 8 and 9. I think 7 starts to set the tone for season 8. And if you like story arcs and stuff, season 7 is awesome and will probably rank a little higher. But if you're not super involved in the episode to episode, that's why it gets a little lower. So I look at season 8 and I think, okay, we're not quite as out there as season 9 was. I mean, season 9 was just wacky as hell. But there's so much just really funny things that happen. And a lot of people would argue, like, they have smaller story arcs, like George having to work at the foundation after, what happened in season 7. And then Elaine has a little bit more with work and everything. Like, there's a story arc with that as well. So you kind of see after season 4, there's like mini story arcs, but not any that really overshadow just the main day-to-day. And there's a noticeable difference in like tone, intro, the opening of all the shows, the classic Seinfeld, like, stand up and your jokes being weaved throughout the show kind of dissolves in this season. And it's more like there's just funny stuff and you can tell there's more writers involved and, there's a whole lot of different choices when it comes to writing. Like, there's just so many hands involved in these episodes. So each one has a little different flair. And I think when you get into these, it becomes more individualized episodes. But there's some, wacky out there stuff. The Van Buren boys one. I mean, the little Jerry. There's just a few episodes where you get into like the chicken roaster one. So when the episode about the chicken roasters and restaurant opens up across the street and it's this big red sign, and there's just so many hilarious bits. So you follow Kramer through that, you follow Jerry, they all kind of weave together. But I think it's just funny how you can kind of get lost in all these different stories but end up at the same place. Very good writing and very kind of loose writing at the same time, but I love it. It's so hilarious. One highlight too, I would like to say, is the Yada episode where people just kind of skip over details and stories. Back in the 90s, I remember this. Like, I was young, but I was growing up, and I didn't understand this when I was growing up. People used to say that all the time, and people used to just skip over details, and I had no idea. As a kid, when you hear something like that, you have no idea what's going on. Like, that's not taught in schools. You don't read that in a book, So when people do that in everyday language, it's like, what the hell is going on? And again, kind of parallels to today when there's more shorthand and more like, you break up things or acronyms for stuff and you don't really get the full picture or full details. I mean, it's a pretty noticeable thing. And for me to remember that, in that episode so vividly too, it's like, man, what an impact, But I do think season 8 is a good place to start if you just want to kind of casually jump in, laugh a little bit. It's going to be a little confusing, I think, just because of how weird and loose it is, but it's a very unique style compared to some of the rest of the seasons. I mean, they had a lot of writers mix it in and help out with the writing throughout the seasons, but I think there was that, like I say, Larry David was one of the writers and directors on most of these, or not directors, producers, one of the writers and producers on most of these seasons up until about 8, 9, and probably a little bit of 7. You see that influence kind of come in from outside. But it was, season 8 is like 9, but better, and 7, but without having to be there for every single bit. You can kind of jump in. So I like it because it's a little more casual and a lot of funny. It's a lot of funny. After this, though, we get into some real heavy-hitting seasons. I think season 3, which is next at my 4th spot, so 4th from the top. Season 3 is awesome. It's one of those early episodes. Again, people are still trying to figure it out, but not as much. Like, we feel kind of locked in. And there are so many classic episodes on this. I mean, season 2, you kind of, you jump around. You get in there. There's some funny parts. It's a little more subtle, a little quieter. But season 3 is where everybody kind of takes off on their own. So each character has kind of locked in. Each character feels really good at what they do. The acting starts taking over. Jerry's a little more comfortable in his role. The library, my God, what a great episode. Followed by the parking garage, which, we've all been there. We've all forgotten where we parked at one point or the other. And I thought even in this day and age, I was like, this can't happen, Like, I get it back in the day. There's no phones. There's no trackers, none of that stuff. But then, I went to a hotel in Las Vegas, one of the big casino hotels that has an underground garage. And talk about being lost. I had no idea where anything was, what anything was. Those lots are huge. Every car just starts to look exactly the same when you're looking for your car. And, it's just dark and dimly lit. Nothing makes any sense. So it is relatable and it's funny, but so many good places to jump off in season 3. So many good episodes, and they always are playing on TV. They're always in rotation. God, the boyfriend episode is so funny. The acting in that, it's one of the first fairly notable cameos also. So it's like, it's got it all, and it's hilarious when it talks about like moving and the bro code and everything like that without it being the bro code. Obviously it's not as modernized and dumbed down, but it's just hilarious how they parallel so many things, and the relationship aspect of it where Jerry's like kind of jealous of Elaine for dating Keith Hernandez, but then he's also more jealous. She wonders why he's jealous. Is it because she's dating him or he's hanging out with her and canceled on him? So it's just so funny, the mix up and the confusion, and just, again, the shock and the acting in it, the subtleties that all the characters have, so good. The subway episode, the red dot episode, like, just stuff that we've all kind of been through. And I think this is the first episode, series, or first season with episodes where you are just stuck in the same scenario for the entire 30 minutes and you're along for a ride. The settings don't change. The scenes don't really change. The parking garage, the subway. It's interesting how you can get so much out of so little. And they really started to show this, the way the show was going to be from now on. And I think it's a great space to start. Like I say, either season 3 or season 4 is great. Season 4, if you like the arc, the overall, like, follow the characters, get to know the characters. Season 3, if you just want to watch any episode and feel like, oh, this is a funny show. There are low points in this season, though. I think they were still, like I say, figuring it out. The dog episode, I cannot stand it. I almost have to skip it every time just because it's so annoying. And you can see a pretty noticeable drop-off in viewership after that episode. I just don't like dogs barking and things like that, and it was, prominent throughout. To me, it just kind of was a fairly boring and, almost like, I don't know, just more grating episode. It wasn't as funny as it was just kind of like, oh, I'm getting kind of frustrated, So there were a few things in there that still they were, again, figuring out their audience, figuring out what was going on. The Good Samaritan, that was a great episode. And then you could tell in the next episode because so many people tuned into the next one, And I just think it's hilarious how viewership statistics can kind of jump up and down. And show, like, where the highs and low points were, because you just look for the episode before. Was it a low point and then it went high, or was it high and then it went low because that episode wasn't as good as people were expecting, But 3 is a great season. It's it's pretty up there in my ranking for sure. I know, like, 4 is kind of a middle score, but really, I think 3 is where you start getting leaps and bounds above the other seasons, and that's where you can jump in. The whole reason I thought about doing this list and ranking was, 1, because I love Seinfeld. It's like my favorite show. But 2, because people that don't get it or don't get into it, ask me, like, where am I supposed to start? And I thought to myself, like, I was telling my friends who wanted to start watching the show, don't worry about season 1. Don't worry about season 2 yet, Maybe check out season 3, but season 4 is where, in my opinion, it starts getting real good. And they're like, so you got to wait 3 seasons, essentially 3 to 4 years before you can really get into the show. And I was thinking to myself, like, God, yeah, I guess, yeah, but, at the time it was on TV and there wasn't streaming services and stuff, so you just kind of watched it and it got in your, it got ingrained in your head and you could jump into it. But yeah, I mean, season 4 is where you really get hooked on it, so I don't know. There was a lot of polish in there. Like, actually, you could look at season 1, 2, and 3 and see a noticeable difference in quality with the, the shift in, like, how it was produced or how the show looked, how vivid everything looked, how, wildly put together the set was versus just some basic sets and things like that. And they have elements throughout, of course, but, you really can tell a quality difference when you move up. Season 6 will be my next entry into this list at spot 3. So, season 6 for me, a lot of great episodes. And I mean, like, it again, there's a light story arc here where George's parents are getting a divorce. So every season from season 4 on kind of has this, like, overall theme. It's just not as prominent. But there are so many great episodes, so many funny things going on. The Doodle is hilarious. I think that part alone is funny. The race, where, Jerry and his love for Superman kind of get paralleled into the show. They start doing a lot more of that this season, where you can kind of see, like, little bits and pieces from, kind of the characters' like actual lives and then what they're interested in, but also anything going on in the world at the time gets kind of paralleled into. They did a little bit of that in season 4, but this one you can kind of see a lot more, like, this is what was going on at the time, and now it's ingrained in the Seinfeld season as well. Very funny season. Throughout the whole thing, the Big Salad, God, the Big Salad episode, so many quotable lines in that. Again, if you like Seinfeld, you're going to be quoting Seinfeld. It's going to happen. And I do it all the time. Some people get it, some people don't. It's almost like, like a mating call between friends or whatever. You do a Seinfeld line and then they go, oh, yeah, that was a great episode. Or they do the next line back. And it's so weird and so just, crazy, of course. But it's hilarious how, you can kind of identify a Seinfeld lover because of that. And I know there's a lot of different shows, movies, music, whatever, where people do that. But Seinfeld just feels so, I don't know. It's like, this is going to be a weird reference, but it's like the Slayer of, sitcoms and shows where like a Slayer fan can just spot a Slayer fan. Which, again, I'm not really big into Slayer, but I know that's a big meme throughout the community. And it's the same deal with Seinfeld. Like, I'll raise my hand and say, yes, I am that guy, that I'll make a quote and I'll see, like, when I'm streaming or something, who gets the idea or gets the quote or whatever. And I just get that sense of, oh, yeah, that's, we know. It's such a weird thing. And I know it's such a, I don't know, almost like, oh, he's in an exclusive club. It's not like that at all, but you know what I mean. Label Maker episode was great. And, we start getting a lot more of the prominent, like, I guess, they're cameos, but they're characters that kind of come and go. I just feel like when it comes to some of the celebrity cameos, they're usually one-hit wonders. But here, there's a lot of characters that kind of come back in and then they get their start and jump into other shows and series and things like that. And I think it's hilarious. Label Maker's a great one. And, all the characters just feel like they flow in and out of the seasons so well. Everybody does a great job on this show. For me personally, like, just, it hits all the marks. I see what I want to see. It's so frustrating sometimes because people that don't, like, I watched this with my friend, right? Like, one of my best friends, I watched Seinfeld all the way through with him. And he was picking up on the subtleties and things like that of the actors. And so I could, look over and be like, oh, yeah, you saw that too. That's great. It only comes with a show you really love and can study and actually, like, sit there through. Like, I can't pick up subtleties in anything else I do or watch. I just don't have the attention span. But this show, like, that's why it's so special to me. Like, I actually can sit there and pick up that kind of stuff. Like I say, I'm not some connoisseur. I'm not some great film guy. I don't know anything about production or movies or any of that stuff, but I think it's just hilarious, when I actually do sit and watch what's going on besides what they're saying, the body language is great. Again, I'm not saying I'm some kind of film snob or critic. I don't know anything about it, and that's why I'm doing this, because like I say, this is a show about nothing. This is a YouTube channel about nothing. That's just kind of my life. It's just about nothing. Season 5, I'm going to rank at the second spot. This comes off the heels of, spoiler alert, season 4, my favorite season. And it just kind of picks up where season 4 left off. Every single episode in this season is just so good. I could watch it all the way through 1,000 times. The sniffing accountant is hilarious, and the things they do in there. The non-fat yogurt's great. The conversion, everything is just so good in here. Everything. They just tackle such faux pas topics, but not in super offensive ways, I would think. I mean, I definitely think people could be offended by things they do, but it's not a criticism. It's more just like an observation, which is what I love about this show. It's more of observational comedy about everyday life versus, hey, you have to feel this way. They don't mind what side of the argument you're on, and they make an argument for each side too. I mean, they tackled some pretty heavy-hitting topics, and they did it in, like, more funny ways, or more relatable ways, and they just kind of showed both sides of the argument. They didn't pick a side or tell you had to pick a side or do any subtleties like that. They just stated stuff. They just said what it looks like, and I thought that was a very fun way to tackle such divisive topics. It was, there's a lot that goes into it, and I don't think some shows handle it well. The puffy shirt episode is a classic. I mean, there's just so many jokes and so many quotable things in that episode. It's just hilarious. The imagery a lot of the times if you look up Seinfeld, you will see Jerry in that puffy shirt, and it makes a reappearance later on as well. So that goes back into the callbacks and the things I was talking about earlier. It's a great jumping off point for all the different callbacks and things like that. But they had plenty of those in season 4 as well. It just kind of continues that party. And then, season 5 is a great place to start, but I feel like if you're going to start at season 5, there's no better season than season 4 to start jumping into this. And it kind of comes back to what I was saying before. Like season 1, the whole thing's a pilot show. You kind of want to go, and if you're a historical, show, if you watch the documentaries, if you've seen all the episodes and you want to go back and watch season 1, it'll be a little better, make a little more sense, but you don't need to watch it. Season 2, a lot of ins and outs, a lot of really good bits, and it doesn't feel as polished. It feels like it's, season 1 part 2 where they really start making a show and they're figuring it out. Season 3 is great. Everybody feels pretty figured out, but the whole writing, the whole cognitive world building or whatever that has to go into it isn't quite there yet. So to me, it feels more like, you can jump back into season 3 and watch and have a good time. But season 4 is masterfully done. And this is where that big risk thing, this is where everything I talk about, everything I like about the show kind of takes effect. So there's a lot of continuity, a lot of jokey, kind of callback things to it. So if you watch an episode further in the development of the season, you can see jokes from things that were back in the early parts of the season. The contest, for instance. So, that's one where they set up a pretty big callback, a pretty big joke where George is in the hospital. He puts his mom in the hospital accidentally. The reasons are hilarious. It's a great episode. But, he's being celibate, and abstinent and everything like that. And the whole show is based on that concept. So then, there's a nurse giving another woman a sponge bath on the other side of the curtain, and he's getting all worked up and everything like that. So that's a funny scene, but they do that again later on in the series with a guy giving a guy a sponge bath, and George is feeling other mixed feelings. And so it's just hilarious how you see a moment of oh God, not now, to then later on when he's like, oh, I can't be here for this, or he's so worried about his own sexuality. It's so hilarious to see that. And, again, it's just really just dumb, humor that is kind of skirting that edge of what's acceptable, but also doesn't quite jump over it, that the next callback would be, I believe it was The Outing is when that happens. And it's just so funny. God, it's just such a great quotable episode. The whole series is kind of arced around them literally. Now, this is the craziest thing about this show. So this season is when they took a risk and went with the whole series arc. Sitcoms never have series arcs. Sitcoms never do this, but they're going to take a risk and do it. And, every sitcoms before have done it, but they didn't make it the focal point of the whole series or season. In this one, they did. And so the idea is they plan to pitch a show, and it's a show about nothing. So Seinfeld is making a show called Jerry on the show Seinfeld. And, George is apparently paralleled as a Larry David character. Jerry is Jerry, of course. And this is essentially them showing how they created their show while they're on their show and how it, went from the ups and downs the whole way through. Oh, man, it is just absolutely perfection. So if you want to jump into the show, season 3 is a good spot to do it. But if you're invested and you want to watch the whole series through, season 4 feels like the best place because you will see various bits and pieces the whole way through that kind of show how the rest of the show is going to go, how each episode has its own kind of story within it, and then how there's this overall story as well for the rest of most of the seasons. Again, I think it's so great because there's 4 main characters, but every single one of them has a very important role in each story, and they have different stories. So there's a story within the actual show for each character, and they do it so well. I don't think a whole lot of other shows really tackle that. I like a lot of new sitcoms. I like a lot of, if you watch, like, let's say, The Office or something, before it becomes more of a love story than a comedy, before, all the characters start to split off and leave and everything like that, there are episodes where a character has its own, unique, like, storyline written in. But they don't do that for every character, obviously, because there's a lot of characters. You got your Jim story, but it's just sometimes it takes a backseat to, the Michael story or, the Dwight story or whatever, whoever the favorite character is for that season. In this one, though, they really do kind of hammer home individual stories for every character. They can kind of weave together. Sometimes they're a little less, sometimes they're a little more, but for the most part, you get invested in what they're doing, and it's, there's something relatable in most of the episodes, too. So I think they do a really good job of writing. I look at this show and I think, man, as stupid as it is, as like, comedic and about nothing, like they say, there is really a lot of details in there that kind of go into it. And season 4 is just a freaking masterful example of how they do it. So I really love this season. I can go back and watch this anytime. I mean, I can watch the whole show anytime, but this is one where I could literally just sit there and, watch the whole thing front and back. So that's my ranking. From start to finish, season 1 at 9, season 2 at 8, season 9 at 7, season 7 at 6, season 8 at 5, season 3 at 4, season 6 at 3, season 5 at 2, and then the best season of all, in my opinion, is season 4. Again, I usually just make stuff on this channel that I'm interested in or that I just want to talk about. If anybody finds any value in watching this, that's awesome. If anybody can, feel free to comment your favorite seasons, favorite episodes, whatever. It's all just objective. I mean, you might not even like the show, and I totally get it, That's the best thing about, like I say, art in general, whether it's film, music, whether it's digital art, oil paints, whatever you're doing, it's all subjective. It's all what is in the eye of the beholder. And, for me, this show is just kind of it. Like, I'm very comforted by this show. I love it. I think it's a great show. And again, very relatable too. So thank you all for hanging out. I appreciate you very much. Again, like I say, please feel free to comment anything on this. If you enjoy this or not, that's fine. Like I say, it's all up to you. I'm going to be doing more things on this show, on this YouTube channel that is, rankings, tier list, discussions, whatever, and kind of work it into things I love. But yeah, if any other options of things you want to see on here, music, TV, whatever, movies, games, I'm into it all, and I don't mind diving deep into stuff. So feel free to leave comments below, suggestions, whatever. I appreciate you either way. Y'all are incredible. And I can't thank y'all enough for even giving me a chance to do this. So please have a good one. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one. Take care, y'all.